Yes, thank you, Rick. As he said, I'm a staff member with New Jersey Farm Bureau. I uh, I handle a multiple of issues, one being labor, as well as some others dealing a lot with trucking and pesticides and water issues across the state. So I cover, I'm cover most of the state on those issues, and we'll field calls on that. And try to, in New Jersey is a unique state. We're small, condensed, so we do have a lot of presence from our state agencies, be it U.S. Department of Labor, New Jersey Department of Labor, and actually New Jersey DEP when it comes to farm employees. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. We'll get started. All right. As I was mentioned, education and outreach is kind of what we try to do. As Rick said, we'll host labor meetings featuring USDOL, New Jersey DOL, and New Jersey DEP. They're probably the three prominent agencies that you may deal with on your farm when you have farm labor. And my role here is to help answer questions, or if I don't have an answer, refer you to the appropriate agency. And then finally, as far as a membership with Farm Bureau, we do a weekly newsletter. And within that newsletter, we'll put up updates on dealing with new regs that may be implemented, or new laws that are being debated and looking to be passed at the state legislature or even federally. So the big question I always get from members is, they're looking to get into farming or have farms many times, and it deals with finding workers. That's becoming more of an issue in recent times with, obviously the low unemployment, labor shortages that are occurring to all businesses. I find talking to most growers, the most successful is word of mouth, either through their neighbors. A lot of times workers will source additional workers through their existing workers who may know somebody, or family members, and that type seems to be the most common. The other resource is farm labor contractor, also known as a crew leader. Crew leaders will provide workers to multiple businesses. There will be one person that'll be registered that you would work with and supply them. I've heard of, in more recent times, farms that have turned to temporary agencies. This has mostly been in the northern part of the state, where maybe workers aren't as prevalent and workers aren't needed as long. So some farms have utilized them. There's obviously New Jersey Department of Labor Job Service Office. They obviously try to provide employment for workers that reach out to their services. What is becoming extremely popular in this worker shortage time is the guest worker visa, known as H-2A, and then the use of day laborers, which may be utilized from a local town or come in for a few days to work on your enterprise business. The first thing I'll touch on is the first and foremost is the I-9 employment eligibility verification. This, I find a lot of growers who may not use, per se, migrant workers from another country, may not know they have to complete this. Every employee has to complete an I-9, whether they're a migrant worker, a U.S. citizen. Everybody has to complete that. Within the document, it'll ask for specific documents that can apply, that are acceptable. You cannot ask for specific documents. They have to be able to provide what is offered in the I-9 acceptable document list. If the documents appear reasonable on their face, that they're genuine, you must accept them. You don't want to question per se a document. Your job is not to verify them. Your job is to accept them and make sure you have them. That's kind of how we've been working under this whole issue, dealing with undocumented workers. They're not technically, as you to the employee, they're not undocumented. You have documents, and if you have met your obligation. And then with the I-9, you're required to retain them for 3 years after the date of employment begins, or 1 year after the date the person's employment is terminated, whichever is later. So moving on to the H-2A workers, the visa, that's a visa that a worker will acquire that is out of the United States. They cannot apply for the program within the United States. They have to be outside of our borders. It's the only program available for agriculture to hire seasonal workers from outside the US. The program does have its shortfalls. It's quite expensive and requires extensive paperwork. And I usually do recommend some type of agency to help facilitate the process. This shows a little bit of where we've been headed with the H-2A program. You'll see, in 2012, there was very few, maybe it was about 20 growers using it, bringing in about 500 workers. Well, you fast forward to 2022, we're right around 3,400 workers at about 115, I think at last count, 119 that are farms filing applications for workers. This has mostly been driven by necessity, definitely not as a result of convenience. I don't usually growers, when they turn to this program, it's a last resort, just because of the cumbersome and expense involved in participating in this visa program. The basic requirements under the H-2A is the recruitment of US workers. You have to, prior to you seeking out workers through the H-2A program, one of the requirements is you have to recruit US workers. The rate of pay, you're required to pay the highest of the adverse wage rate, prevailing wage rate, or minimum wage. New Jersey, most states, it ends up being the adverse wage rate, where I think ours is going to, for 23, will be at 1655. Every year that is recalculated, and it's based on a USDA survey, and it's a survey we have a lot of issues with as far as from Farm Bureau, because it's not showing the good comparison to what wages are being paid on the farm. There's guarantees. You have to guarantee 3/4 of the contract to a worker. So no matter what, they have to get 3/4 of their guaranteed contract. You have to provide housing. You have to provide transportation to and from your business, from their point of origin, as well as the inbound and exbound. Wage and hour. The wage and hour enforcement. This is where you'll see most of your presence on farms. It's probably who does most of the inspections in New Jersey by two entities. The U.S. Department of Labor will enforce the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Migrant Seasonal Protection Act, the OSHA Occupational Safety Hazard rules, as well as the H-2A contracts. New Jersey Department of Labor, most of their involvement will involve minimum wage, child labor, and then the unemployment and disability insurance. And then finally, you have the paid sick leave, which is mandatory in New Jersey. Under New Jersey Department of Labor regulations, these are the statutes that they will enforce under wage and hour, the New Jersey sick leave, the New Jersey child labor regs, as well as the New Jersey Seasonal Farm Labor Act. That's where the crew leader registration is housed, as well as the field sanitation. New Jersey minimum wage increased as of January 1. It goes to $12.01. It's been exceeding in 2019. There was legislation passed that set the minimum wage to eventually cap out at $15 in 25, actually 24. That is also tied to what was constitutionally passed, the CPI adjustment. So because of inflation being so high this year, the actual wage for the agricultural, and this is for field agricultural packing house employees, will be $12.01. Non-ag employees, that is incorrect. It's actually $14.13. I didn't update the CPI on that one. So this will be for workers that would be working in, say, retail parts of the farm markets, and so forth. So you just want to be aware of that. If you're selling other people product that's not yours, then it would be considered retail. Under minimum wage, some of the violations I'll see growers will experience from inspections will be illegal deductions, which may be for sometimes growers will provide rain gear or different tools. Technically, you're not allowed to deduct for that. Excessive meal charges, the tool charges, as I mentioned, as well as housing and damages they may cause. Basically, there cannot be any deduction that would take them below minimum wage. The other rule that New Jersey Department of Labor is involved in on farms is regarding child labor. We're pretty much focused on the New Jersey regulations because they are more restrictive than federal. If you're meeting the state regs, you'll be in compliance with the federal. 12 to 15-year-olds, they can only work outside of school hours. Non-hazardous occupations, working papers are needed. No power equipment allowed. So anything that's mechanically powered, they should not be using. 16 to 17-year-olds, those up to 16 have to be outside of school hours to work, but beyond that, they could work during school hours. No hazardous occupations, including equipment that does cutting, such as power tools. That would be like your choppers and your mowers, anything that has a cutting mechanism. They are not allowed to be using that equipment at their age. 18 and over, pretty much opens to any job at any time. I will circle back regarding working papers. I think that is going to change as of June 1st, tentatively, with the state. There was legislation passed this past year that is creating a new process for working papers. Historically, they've always been acquired through the school district. That is going to change to the Department of Labor, New Jersey Department of Labor. It's going to be an online process. And what will happen, the youth will fill it out, will apply once, and then we'll just update employers as they change. So I think the way it's going to work out is historically agriculture only needed working papers up till 15. When they changed the rule, that exemption did not remain. So what will happen is they'll probably have to have working papers up till 17, but once they apply once, then they're in the system for the duration. So I think it's kind of a give and take, and hopefully it will work out. But like I said, that program is not supposed to come into play until June. We had a discussion with the Commissioner of Labor, and they're supposed to be on schedule. So we'll see how that works out. The hazardous occupations, some examples of them is, forklifts, lawnmowers, driving passengers, handling chemicals, can't handle chemicals till 18, operating hay balers, corn pickers, etc. The new law, well, it's a few years in now, that all employers are obligated to follow is the New Jersey paid sick leave law. Employers are not required to allow employees to accrue more than 40 hours. 40 hours is the max you have to allow your workers over the course of a year. Employers are entitled to choose whether they use the accrued method or the front-loaded method. So you have the opportunity to require the workers to accrue their hours, or you could just give them the 40 hours right up front. You can impose a 120-day waiting period for new hires. And as well as the paid sick leave will apply to part-time employees. An employer is entitled to establish a 12-month period known as your benefit year. So once you pick your year, you have to stay with that, and all employees must be on that same calendar schedule. Once established, the benefit year cannot be changed without reaching out to New Jersey Department of Labor. They can deny any request for change if it looks like it's going to evade the requirements. An employee who is discharged or laid off or otherwise separated from employment, if they're rehired within 6 months, any unused accrued sick leave must return upon hiring. The accrual process is they're obligated to 1 hour of sick time for every 30 hours of work. Labor posters. As an employer, you're required to post specific labor posters for your employees. The state and federal agencies have made it much easier to attain those free of charge. There is agencies that will provide you a nice, as in the picture there, a nice big laminated poster with all the required postings. You're not required to use them. You're not required to purchase them from those type of agencies, but many do because it's easy. It's one stop, and they come in a nice big laminated poster. The state and federal agencies have created websites where you can go on and print off posters. Obviously, some of them aren't the typical 8x11, so it may be a little smaller, a little larger print. For example, the New Jersey child labor poster requires probably, I think it's like 11x17, but it will print to an 8x11, just small print. But you can go on and print your posters as needed. And I'll throw the links are in the on the PowerPoint, but I'll go in after and put them in the chat. If needed, you can click on that and get the posters you need. U.S. Department of Labor is the other next agency where we see most of probably some of the strongest presence on farms. Their laws that they enforce, the main one is their Fair Labor Standards Act. That's the minimum wage, overtime for 40 hours per week, child labor, different standards for ag and non-ag. But as I said, mostly if you're following the state, you're meeting the criteria for the federal rules. Record keeping provisions, that's regarding the pay stubs and payroll. And then there is some exemptions under the act I'll mention. The one exemption is if you have less than 500 man days in a preceding year. One worker working at least 1 hour per day is a man day. So usually the number they say is if you have around 10 workers, depending, that'll put you over the threshold. But if you're under that, you would be exempt from the minimum wage and overtime. Now, agricultural employees that are working in the field, packing house, would be exempt from the overtime under the ag exemption. And then if it's a employer is a parent or spouse or other member of the immediate family performing the work on the farm, they would be exempt, such as your kids and on the farm. The farm labor, the FS Farm Labor Standards, the Fair Labor Standards Act exempts primary and secondary ag employees from overtime. That's the ag exemption. Some employees of an ag employer may be exempt and some may not be exempt, depending on what they're doing. If you have an ag employee that is doing ag work and may be exempt from overtime for his occupations, but say you have a retail market and he works in the retail market at some point, he'll lose his overtime exemption for that week. Now, it's not permanently, but it will be for that week. Also applies if they're if you're a farm that, say brings in a lot of product from another farm to pack in that type of scenario, they would lose that exemption. They cannot handle other people's product. They can only handle your own, as that's from the farm. Nursery operations, defining engaged in ag, that's sowing seeds, propagating fruit, shade, vegetable in order, typically handling your plants and flowers. And then you can, carrying the plants from propagating frames to the field, and then all the activities in taking care of those crops would be considered engaged in ag. Farm stands and greenhouses, employees working in a farm stand or greenhouse selling only products grown on the farm are exempt from overtime. Employees working in a stand and greenhouse selling products that not grown on the farm and other products not grown on the farm are not entitled to overtime, and there's no tolerance under the Act. Many of the farms that use seasonal migrant workers will fall under the Migrant Seasonal Worker Protection Act. This is a regulation that protects migrant workers. A lot of the farms, particularly the wholesale farms, which may have larger workforces, typically fall under this, that are using workers either from say Mexico or Puerto Rico. They would be those workers would be protected under the Migrant Seasonal Worker Protection Act. Under the Act would include payroll, payroll receipts, promised wage, posting, disclosure, crew leader registration, vehicle safety, health, and housing and safety. The one requirement is, which many growers kind of run into an issue, is the disclosure document. That's a document you have to provide the worker at time of recruitment. So if they're coming, say, from Florida, technically they should have this in hand before they arrive. If they just walk in off the street onto the farm, then it should be provided to them at that point. And what this document lists is basically rates of pay, period of employment, the time frame when they would start and stop employment for the duration, crops that they'll be harvesting, that workers' compensation is provided, transportation arrangements, and place of employment. This is an example of what the document would look like. And this would typically be provided to the worker. It's a USDA document that is available online. The vehicle safety and health safety standards are required if you're transporting the workers. You're required to provide your safety in your vehicles under DOL standard cars, vans, station wagons. If they travel less than 75 miles, they're under the DOT standards, or under the DOL. Anything outside further than that falls under DOT. You have to have a properly licensed driver, and insurance under the NIFA law requires 100,000 per seat, up to 5 million cap, with 50,000 property damage. A lot of farms will use their liability, umbrella coverage to sometimes meet that requirement under the max 5 million. Under housing safety and health, you're required to provide safe and clean housing to the workers. Housing is owned or controlled by the farm labor contractor, usually the agricultural employer or association. If it's built before 1980, it falls under ETA standards. Built or substantially remodeled after 1980, it falls under OSHA standards. There's not a huge difference. Most of the difference comes down to square footage required for each tenant in the building. OSHA does not have a strong presence in ag. The one place they do is in the temporary labor camps. That pretty much includes anybody housing workers. It's employees engaged in ag, defined by NIFA regardless of the number of employees. And housing standards apply for all covered ag employees without regard to the number of employees housed. So whether you're housing 1 to 50, that would apply. The other regulation OSHA is involved in is regarding field sanitation. This will include drinking water, has to be cool, readily available, potable, and available at all times. And you're also required to provide toilets at a ratio of 1 per 20 workers, no further than a quarter mile. You'll see some farms, because they have multiple fields, will install a porta pot and hand washing stations, say on a small landscape trailer or something to that effect. Makes it a little more versatile to move from field to field if you have multiple fields, rather than have them located in many different areas. The other regulation, if you have farm employees, that you'll have to be aware of is the worker protection standard. That is an EPA rule, as well as adopted by New Jersey DEP, and anyone who owns or manages farm or forest, nursery, greenhouse used in the production of agricultural plants is required to follow these rules. And an agricultural employer is anybody who hires workers for compensation. So anybody that is hiring workers as a business for any type of compensation to the workers, they're responsible for the management and care of those workers under this rule. And anybody that farms with a gross receipts of greater than $2,500 per year needs to be licensed. So you would have to have a pesticide license, obviously under the pesticide rules. But then that also gives you the ability to train your workers to meet the obligations under the WPS rules. Now, a worker is anyone employed on the farm for compensation under this, under the pesticide rule, is doing tasks such as harvesting, weeding, watering, doing any general day-to-day work on a farm, nursery, or greenhouse. Is anybody that is mixing, loading, transferring, or applying pesticides. So these would be anybody that is applying them, handling. It would include your maintenance. If you have a maintenance worker on the farm, they all need to be trained as handlers for handling pesticide materials. This is my contact information. This is also some information for contact information for U.S. Department of Labor, Wage and Hour Division, New Jersey Department of Labor, and New Jersey Pesticide Control. I want to mention, I mentioned the pesticide program because that's where we see a lot of presence from inspection in New Jersey. DEP will go out and inspect license applicators to make sure they're meeting the WPS rules. They were recently updated by EPA. It was technically called, I think, 2015, but by the time it was formally adopted, it was several years after that. So there is new regs under EPA for worker protection standards that the average grower would have to meet for his employees, and that involves the training that's required, providing the safety material, and those type of requirements. And that may be followed up more in depth in some specific training for those programs. But that's I want to make mention of that because it's not necessarily what would be considered a labor as far as with USDOL and NJDOL, but we do get a lot of presence and inspections for them. So as an ag employer, it's something you want to be aware of. As under New Jersey Department of Labor, there is inspections that are conducted by enforcement inspectors throughout the state. They'll come out. They try not to duplicate their inspections with USDOL. USDOL is probably the entity that I receive the most calls on. They have a North Jersey office. They also have a South Jersey office, which is in Lawrenceville. A lot of times they'll pick a period of the year and we'll go out and target some of the South Jersey farms. It's no secret that there's a lot of wholesale which use a lot of labor in those areas, that they'll come out and specifically focus on an area and over a period of time, which is unfortunately in the middle of the growing season. But that's when the workers are there. That's when they have to use their time to come out and make sure they're following their rules are being adhered to. Us at New Jersey Farm Bureau, we try and encourage compliance. Obviously, we have concerns. I try to raise concerns sometimes when something may not there may be an issue where it may seem askew and there may be other factors involved, but what we try to do is encourage compliance. So we will, as Rick said, we'll host the meetings. We'll work with DOL to try and make sure our New Jersey growers are informed of the rules. They're not caught off guard. And it also gives the growers an opportunity, if you reach out, if you try to be preventative, DOL will try to work with you in that aspect too. Granted, I admit we have many issues with them, but if you seek them out prior to an issue, they will try to work with you. But it is important that you're aware of what you're obligated to do, because should you have a complaint by a worker, that's where a lot of them are generated too. Worker leaves for some reason and may not be had some type of disagreement. Sometimes they will end up filing a complaint with Department of Labor, and at this point you could trigger a inspection, or it could be, as I mentioned, a random inspection where they'll stop in at farms that, that they suspect may hire farm labor. So that's kind of, that's the quick and overall view of everything that I see on a day-to-day basis, as far as, being ahead of the regulations and laws that you'd be obligated to follow as an employer in New Jersey on a farm. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to take any.
Ben, we asked people to put questions in the chat, and
Okay.
they have been questioning all along the way. So
All right.
I'm going to go back and try to make sure I get everybody questions answered for everybody. First, Teresa asked if the slides will be available. They are available in the Canvas site, so you
Yes.
can log in there. I just checked through and looked at them myself to go back and see. If I could answer Melanie's first question, which was back on the child labor point. Does child labor laws apply to your own kids working on the farm?
Your own children are exempt. You have to be careful with that, though. The only caveat is if the farm is under a corporation, that gets a little gray. The parents will have to be the main shareholders, owners of the corporation to be exempt. But in most cases, yes, your kids are exempt.
Next question is, how do most people track earned sick leave, especially for seasonal employees? And I thank Sherry Dudas, our next speaker, for jumping in and saying they use a payroll company, but do you have any other thoughts on?
Yeah, you're required. I mean, it's required to be documented on their payroll. So either if you use a payroll agency or if you do your own, you're going to be required to track that. As far as employees coming back, obviously you'd have to look at the time frame, and if it's the same employee under the same name coming back, and it's within that 6 months, then you would have to continue with their sick time. So it's basically, you're required to track it as an employer with the payroll. So it's upon you, and usually the payroll is the best.
Emily asked, can you clarify on FLSA and overtime exemptions? If an employee works in a packing house that buys fruit from another grower and resells it under their own label, does the overtime apply?
They would lose their overtime exemption in that scenario and would be required to pay overtime, for the simple fact that they are packing somebody else's product. Once you leave your own product and start handling a product not produced on the farm, that's where the overtime exemption is lost. So yeah, they would lose it in that case.
Maria asks, and this is one of my favorite questions, how does an internship or apprenticeship fit within these requirements, especially if education and/or housing is provided as part of the role?
There is specific criteria regarding internships. It has to be an accredited program. So in order to be considered a intern, and this is mostly an internship where they're not being paid, that it has to be an accredited. It cannot be replacing somebody that would be a full-time employee that would be needed, almost being used as in place of a full-time employee. So there is some specific language regarding that, and maybe during this I can find that up and put it in the chat. I could get a link to that and provide it in the chat for Maria.
Just a quick summary of it. It's basically says that an internship cannot be a replacement for a full-time employee, and the relationship with an intern is that it will likely cost you money, not save you money, in that you are providing a training program, not replacing employment.
That is correct.
Another question, Christina asked, if you don't use pesticides, do you still need to be licensed or certified?
If you don't use pesticides, then no. But you have in New Jersey, you basically you have to be licensed for general as well as restricted. So it's pretty much anything you're using that is considered a general or restricted would require a license. So if you're not using any pesticides, then no.
Including if you claim that you're organically producing and using organically approved pesticides. If you are using organically approved pesticides, you need to be certified.
Yes, you're still obligated.
Melissa indicated there's a site that can answer a lot of pesticide questions in the chat. Last question I see here before we open it up, is a 1099 employee at all applicable?
Typically not in the agricultural sector. I know it's used. It's probably the most common issue that comes up as far as under Department of Labor. Not so much in the ag industry, but they're always trying to define and redefine that. But there is specific criteria that the state has that defines a independent contractor, because that's what they're basically declaring. That it has to be something, they have to be doing a job that's really not related to what they're doing. So it has to be, so if you're a farm, it would have to be somebody coming in. If they're coming in and doing farm work, they're not going to be considering it an independent contractor. It would have to be somebody coming in doing something that your business does not do in normal day activity. So I know it's done, but you know, that is the state is trying to crack down on the whole independent contractor.
Well, they're trying to test your mettle here, Ben. Regarding volunteers, like the WOOF program, and somebody needs to correct me if I'm wrong, it's the Worldwide Organic Something Farming Program. Do any of the laws discussed apply? Basically, that program allows people to go around the world and volunteer for a couple of weeks on organic farms.
That is a very gray area that is starting to I think get a little more attention. But when you include volunteer, when you start using volunteers, technically they are, if there's an employer relationship, technically they're supposed to be paid. There is volunteer programs, but they're supposed to be for nonprofit type programs. I know New York ran into an issue because of a lot of people were volunteering at wineries, either pouring wine as a benefit to receive other benefits. I could try and find some information on that, but it's if they're within a program and a nonprofit, then yes, they're not required to, they're not subject to these rules. But you just want to be careful if you're bringing in volunteers, if they're just coming in to work on the farm, DOL could look at that as an employer-employee relationship, and unless it's a, involving a nonprofit, they could severely question that.
And
So it's a little bit of a gray area. I mean, I'm not familiar with that program specifically, but just in volunteers in general, you want to be careful.
and that can be a critical issue because several CSAs make volunteering to work on doing some of the field work as part of the requirement for membership.
Yes,
So
that is
use
something that's
yourself.
becoming more and more popular. DOL isn't necessarily doesn't have a focus on that right now, but it's something I'm looking at, trying to get more clarity, and I think they're trying to get more clarity on how to handle this, because it's kind of seems to be a phenomenon that's growing.
Two more quick questions. Anybody has anything else burning real quickly, pop it in the chat. We'll try to get to it, but we're getting close on time. Do minor workers need to fill out an I-9?
If it's a minor, no, because they won't necessarily. I mean, it's once they are over 18, then they would.
And then there's another comment about interns. Seems like the NCAT/ATRA, one of those is National Council of Alternative something. Listings for internships are just jobs. Any commentary from the instructors? There are a lot of programs, and those are nonprofit educational
Oh,
organizations. But yes, a lot of organizations will call basic jobs for summer students internships.
yeah,
So it gives them work experience, but it doesn't necessarily give them, it gives them usually minimum wage, if anything.
yeah, you're starting to see more of those type of programs offering internships, whether it be through a college or an entity like that. And there's even been legislation to try and create a program. It hasn't passed yet, but it's been proposed to form a internship program where a individual could work on a farm for a summer uh, through an educational program. I know, like, Rutgers has some programs, beginning farmers and so forth, but modeling something after that, where part of the criteria would be creating an internship where they could work on a farm for the summer.
Well, thank you, Ben. That's the end of the questions I see there. Ben has provided his contact information, and what we're going to do now before we go to our next speaker is take a quick poll, and everybody can quickly answer some of these questions. If I can make it work here, there it is. And we'll launch that poll. And so we'll have that up for a little bit. And there are 7 questions. You just scroll down on the scroll bar on the left and answer all of those. We'll see what kind of reactions we get.
Hello, Rick.
Yes.
I just want to make, after I said something, I realized what I said. I want to make a clarification on the one question regarding I-9s. And minors, I was thinking of something else. Minors do have to complete an I-9. Every employee has to complete an I-9. If they don't have any of the information, a parent can or may establish identity for the minor, but everybody technically is supposed to complete an I-9. So I just wanted to correct that.
So in the pre-poll on Canvas, it's all of the above. And a couple people didn't hear it corrected. on question 2. We get it. Just a quick review of those, and Ben, correct me if I misread these. The two most successful ways to hire workers. Some of this, of course, could be in your own personal situation. You get different options, but word of mouth, everybody chose that one. Farm labor contractor or crew leader. If you're especially hiring seasonal workers, seasonal migrant laborers, farm labor contractors and crew leaders are one of the best options. Not too many people reading the newspapers anymore, apparently, and only a few using bulletin boards. So pretty much in consensus there. Ben corrected this one for everybody. This is true. Everybody needs to fill out an I-9 employment, even minors. Question 3, the 2 agencies that inspect labor regulations, the U.S. Department of Labor and the New Jersey Department of Labor. Correct, everybody. DEP does environmental protection, so they work on the pesticide issues, and the New Jersey Department of Ag works on more plant health, fertilizer issues, things like that. The 2023 minimum wage for agriculture in New Jersey is $12.01. New Jersey has an exemption for agriculture. $14.03 is the new minimum wage for.
That's actually 14.13 is the standard wage.
13 now is the state minimum wage. That comes up as an issue for competition for laborers because in Pennsylvania they still use the federal minimum wage, which I'm not sure what happened to the poll, but the poll again has that last question was all about the types of minimum wage violations, and basically if you charge something back to your employee that takes them under that minimum wage, that is a violation. So pretty sure that was in all of the above, right, Ben?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Rick, there were 2 more on the poll. Are New Jersey child age for employment regulations more restrictive than federal laws? Yes or no? Yes, New Jersey laws are more restricted than federal. And the last question was, can a youth under the age of 18 operate a powered cutting mechanism tool? And the answer is no, and everyone got that correct.
That's right. I do remember seeing those. There was a quick question put into the chat for the I-9. It's required at the time of hire, not application, correct? Because what's that?
That is correct. At point of hire.
At
not
point of hire.
application.
So she says the poll question may have stated the time of application.
Oh,
So you don't get an I-9 when somebody applies. You get it when they hire. They fill that out when they're hired.